Hello, five.
Hello, viewers. We're glad that you're here at St. Joseph's and at the School of Theology in Sewanee, Tennessee. You have turned into the illustrious and famous Old Testament professor, Reverend Dr. Becky Wright, or Rebecca Wright, but we call her Becky. We're glad you're here. This is an experiment this week, and then we'll try to put it on the next 3 weeks, 2 weeks after this. Thanks to Carl and the village that it required to put this all together. So we're grateful. At this time, instead of me talking, I'll let you talk to Dr. Wright.
Now, just a technical bit, I've lost Carl.
Well, you're right.
I've lost
He's with.
There he is.
Oh, there
He
you
didn't
go.
want to show us eating.
Oh, okay.
I didn't think you needed to watch me.
Is there any way for people whom we can't see to ask questions or make comments? Or is that not
It's
possible?
not. But let me say to those of you that are watching, and I get a metric that tells me that there's 5 people on the website. So I think there's 5 of you out there that are watching us from the St. Joseph's website. And like Bill said, welcome, absolutely welcome. And if you would like, you are absolutely welcome to join us in person. And let me, at the risk of creating total chaos, if you would like to do that, write down the following number.
Or Carl,
They could email.
just let them check your emails. A most recent email, just
Maybe you just
would give
they could
everything,
send an email.
information.
Okay, the most recent email you think is good to go?
Yes. Oh, yes. Should have it.
All right. If you do not have that email and you would like to be interactive with us, I'm going to give you my telephone number and I will tell you how to connect and join us live. So my telephone number is 205-310-5548. 205-310-5548. We would love to have you join us. Becky, it's all
Right,
yours.
Bill. That's right, Kmart Shoppers, dial in now. I'm sorry, Carol.
Okay, I am so appreciative that you all didn't just cancel. This is a little bit awkward, but I'd much rather do some Bible study awkwardly than not at all. Last week, as you remember, we left Genesis in chapter 4 when Cain has just killed his brother Abel. And God says to Cain, "Where are you?" And well, says, "Where's your brother?" And Cain says, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And most people think that the correct answer to that question is yes, I'm supposed to be my brother's keeper. And as I said last week, no. God wants us as grown-ups to be brothers and sisters to each other, not anyone keeping anybody else. The word in Hebrew is used for keeping animals. In English, like a zookeeper. And then we kind of left in the middle of the story. As is the case in the Garden of Eden, sin has 2 results. There is punishment, but there's also grace. The first couple is expelled from the garden, and God makes for them clothes better than they could make for themselves. Here again, we have the combination of punishment that Cain is expelled from the garden, and he says, "My punishment is too great to bear. Anywhere I go, anybody will be able to kill me." And God says, "No." Said, "I promise." God puts a mark on Cain, which is a mark of protection. We usually think in English that the mark of Cain is a mark of a negative thing, but rather it is a mark of protection. God is protecting Cain from being killed. But now we have a cycle of violence and it continues to spiral downward. When we come to Lamech, this is chapter 4, verse 19. He took 2 wives, Adah and Zilpah, and he has a little poem beginning in verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. O wives of Lamech, give ear to my speech. I have slain a man for wounding me, and a lad for bruising me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. And I have a feeling, if you put your mind ahead to where Peter says to Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times? And I think Peter is expecting for Jesus to say, well done, yes, forgive 7 times. Instead, Jesus says, no, 77 times. And I think that Jesus very well may have this passage in mind, that Jesus is undoing Lamech's boast, that he is going to be avenged 77-fold. And Jesus says, no, forgive that many times. Some manuscripts say 70 times 7. Oh, good, we're getting more people.
There's Marcia down there. I can tell Marcia, and Katie looks like she's coming on.
Yeah, this is great.
Where did they just announce men that were being born and they didn't announce women?
Pretty much.
Was that why all of a sudden Cain had a wife and they all had wives?
Could be. Yeah.
They were all sisters.
Women tend to be mentioned only in relationship to men. We have very, very few stories of any woman who does anything independently, or any group of women who do anything independently. But I want to get back to forgiveness for a minute. I think what Jesus is meaning when he says forgive 77 times rather than 7, if I try really hard, I can probably remember 7 things without writing them down. There is no way I can remember 77 things. And so if I am keeping very careful track of how many times I have forgiven you, or my brother Howard, who is my usual whipping boy example, and if he does something dumb 76 times and I forgive him, and 77, I say, okay, 1 more time and I can just let you have it. I think what that means is I have not forgiven him even once. Now, forgiving does not mean forgetting, but forgiving does mean not keeping track of how many times you have injured me and I have magnanimously forgiven you. So as I've said before, I think Jesus and most of his hearers were very familiar with the stories of the Old Testament. And so I don't think he picked that number 77 just out of the air. I think he's referring back to this story. Then Adam knew his wife again. She bore another son, named him Seth, and so forth. Chapter 5 is basically genealogy, and I'm not going to read it. Sometimes people want me to, just to hear me stumble over the big, long names. Chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, is a very, very, very strange little passage. And every time I read it, I stop and try to figure out what it means, and I have no idea what it means. It's when men began to increase on earth, daughters were born to them, and the divine beings or the gods or the sons of gods saw how beautiful they were and took wives from among them. So the daughters of men are married to the sons of God, and they give birth to, we're not quite sure what, but they were the heroes of old, the men of renown. I don't know what to make of that. One thing that gives me comfort is, so far as recorded in the Gospels, Jesus never refers to it, so I figure I don't have to worry about it over much. But then we come to verse 5, chapter 6, verse 5. The Lord saw how great was humanity's wickedness on earth, how every plan devised was nothing but evil all the time. It was violent. And the Lord regretted that he had made humanity on earth, and his heart was saddened. The Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings whom I created, as well as the beasts, the creepy crawlies, the birds of the sky, for I regret the whole thing. But Noah, verse 8, Noah found favor with the Lord. No reason given, no explanation. It simply says Noah found favor with the Lord. And then it says Noah was a righteous man in his age. Scholars have debated this for a long time. Does that mean he was righteous in general, or does it mean that the bar was set so low that compared to everybody else who was really awful, Noah was only middling awful, and so he was considered righteous? We just don't know.
Welcome, Jerry Harrison.
Okay. Oh, sure. Okay. All I can see is some shelves, not
I see shelves too.
Then a repetition beginning in verse 11, the earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence. And the Hebrew, one of the Hebrew words for violence, the one used here, is Hamas. Whether that has anything to do with the name of one of the groups in the Middle East today, I do not know, but they sound exactly the same. Hamas, it's violence. Hello, Sherry.
I see a hand.
Yeah.
You know, I'll bet she's on the delay. Anyway, I'm sorry.
There she is.
So God said to Noah, there's going to come a flood, build an ark, and God gives the dimensions, and Noah does it. And there are two flood stories woven together here. Just as there are two creation stories, chapter 1 and chapter 2, two creation stories that are different in detail, although the overarching meaning is the same. But the two stories are put side to side. With the flood story, the two stories are woven together. And we have a tendency to read so quickly that we don't even notice that we have two stories woven together. For instance, how many pairs of animals is Noah instructed to take onto the ark? Well, we all learned in Sunday school, it was one pair of every animal.
Yeah.
And yet, for the clean animals, it's 7 pairs. So the priestly writer, the one who is so concerned with sacrifice, for instance, who says as soon as Noah comes out of the ark at the end of the flood, offers sacrifices to God. Look, you'd better have extra animals for sacrifice, or else you're in deep trouble. You've saved this pair of animals, and then as soon as the flood's over, you sacrifice them. Not very smart. So the priestly writer has Noah taking 7 pairs of clean animals. Similarly, with the source of the water for the flood, we all learned in Sunday school that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That's the J story. The priestly writer says that God opens the windows in that rakia, that upside down hammered metal bowl. Remember that from 2 weeks ago? That coffer dam. God opens those windows and it is chaos water that's coming back in. And God opens the springs underneath. It's chaos water. That the description of the flood from the priestly writer is uncreation. It's taking a lot of the language that the priestly writer uses in chapter 1 to describe what's going on in the flood. It's an uncreation. Until everything is blotted out, only Noah, his family, and however many animals are left. Time comes that the rain stops or the chaos water stops coming in, the waters recede, Noah sends out birds, they come back, then a dove comes back with a olive leaf in its beak, and they know everything is okay. And for, again, no stated reason for this, God simply says, now you all, human beings, you may eat things that aren't just plants. Remember at the end of the first creation story, God says, I give all the plants and all the trees bearing fruit with the seed and the fruit. You can eat all of this. Now God is saying, you can eat animals too, but not the blood. The blood must be poured out on the ground because the blood is the life and the life belongs to God. No reason given. Noah doesn't say, oh, please, can't we have hamburgers once in a while? God bless you.
uh, Becky,
Yes,
Carl had a question.
okay. I can't hear you, Carl.
Can't hear you.
Okay.
You first. I think I've heard this notion of the waters, the chaos waters before. Somewhere we've decided that chaos waters meant rain.
No, it's, the J writer says it rained 40 days and 40 nights. When
Okay,
we read, we just seem to be blind to the chaos waters. I think it's because we read too quickly and without paying attention.
okay. So if you were charged with translating or transcribing that part of the text, how would you translate it? It rained?
When it says it rained, I'd say that. And when it says God opened the windows in the rakia and let in the chaos waters, I'd say that. These two stories have been woven together.
Right.
Instead of, it's a lot neater the way creation is, with the two stories set side by side.
Yes. The
And
reason,
if I were doing this, I would translate it that way, but I'd have a whole lot of footnotes trying to explain what I think is going on.
well,
Find it.
what I wanted to do is, in effect, get permission from you, and I mean that quite seriously, to use a phrase that with others, that I find myself using a long time ago. And that is that we need to keep in mind that these stories that we know of as Genesis were, in a very real sense, first existed as campfire stories.
Mm-hmm.
They were simply told generation after generation. And I don't really know exactly what the definition for transliteration is, but there was, in the telling, there's no doubt that there are surviving elements that maybe don't port real well,
Mm-hmm.
they don't move real well from language to language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there were different groups within Israel who told the stories their own ways.
Yes, exactly.
We had in our own Civil War, we even named the battles differently. Was it the Battle of Bull Run or the Battle of Manassas?
Right.
Well, it depends on which side you're on, what you even call the place.
Right.
Or in a family, the family stories will be told with slight variations depending on which great uncle is telling the story. And I think it's that same sort of thing here. The people and the general outline of the story will be the same, but people tend to give it their own spin. Or spin, it has become a dirty word. We tell it from our own point of view.
Right.
If we're standing on opposite sides of the river, we'll see the same thing slightly differently. And I think that's precisely what has gone on in many of these ancient stories in scripture.
I find it amazing, though, that somebody, it's been a long way since seminaries. I don't know if I'm using the right words correctly, but somehow put these stories even together and didn't clean them up so they made sense. It's just amazing to me that that they felt it was important to preserve, even if it was jumbled together a little bit.
And paradoxical as this may seem, this is one of the reasons I believe in the inspiration of scripture, that it's not all cleaned up, it's not all flattened.
Yeah.
The Holy Spirit says, no, you do it the way that seems good in your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we were writing it today, we would probably write one very neat, starts at the beginning, goes calmly through and ends at the end, with no bumps in it. But that's not how human life is.
Yeah.
This is real, I believe. If it were too smooth, I would distrust it.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Now, God also does something. God says, I promise I will never destroy everything again. In one place says by water, but in the other places just, I will never destroy things again. And God makes a sign, puts a visible reminder in the sky. We call it a rainbow, which is what it is, what it's meant to be. But the word itself is bow, as in bow and arrow. God is basically saying, I disarm myself. This is unilateral disarmament. God does not say to people, if you will be this good, if you will be this faithful, I'll never destroy it again. God simply says, I'm not going to do this again. I promise. And here's a sign. Anytime you see the rainbow, you remember, I'll remember, I'm never going to destroy the world again. What makes me uneasy is God does not say, and I will make sure that you don't destroy it. And pretty much until this generation, human beings really did not have the power to destroy the planet as a place habitable by human beings. We can do that now, and that scares me. But I don't want to dwell on that. We have enough to worry about these days. But being careful and well, I want to be careful not to be misheard. I am not saying that God sent the coronavirus, but I think now that the virus is here, we have great opportunity to learn to live as neighbors to each other, to learn to live as good, faithful Christians and good, faithful Jews and good, faithful Muslims, all the major religions, all of which have parts that say we are supposed to look out for each other. And that's what we're doing tonight by not being together. And I think that's good. And I've gone off on a bunny trail, sorry.
It was good bunny trail.
Yeah. I'm skipping over some of these things simply because I don't want to spend all the time before we get to Abraham. First thing Noah does when he comes out of the ark is plant a vineyard, make wine, and get drunk. Midwestern Methodists love to use this story as a negative example. And then there's this odd event that he gets drunk, he's lying naked in his tent, and one of his sons sees that he's naked and tells his two brothers, and then the two brothers put a cloth between them and walk backwards and cover him up. And then when he finds out, he curses the son of the son who saw him. This makes no logical sense whatsoever. But he says in chapter 9, beginning at verse 25, cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers. And that is the verse that some people in our country's history took to mean that Black people were supposed to be slaves of white people. There is nothing that talks about race here. There's nothing that talks about skin color. Or, I mean, if you've got three brothers, presumably a bunch of nephews, they're not different races. And you know, race is a human construct, not a biological, what's the word I want? It's not a biological reality. Okay. Then in chapter 10, we have more genealogy. Chapter 11, Tower of Babel, and I want to make one comment about this, or probably more than one. Everyone on earth had the same language, same words. As they migrated, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there, and they said to one another, let's make bricks and burn them hard and build in the city a tower with its top in the sky. That little phrase, let's burn these bricks hard, I think is significant. You can make adobe bricks, and if they dry in the sun, they will last very well. They can withstand a rainstorm, and you'll be fine. But if there is a flood, or if they are underwater for any period of time, they will disintegrate unless they've been fired, kiln fired. So these people are saying, basically, just a chapter and a half after God promised, I'm not going to do this again, they're saying they don't believe it. They are not willing to use sun-baked bricks. They want kiln-fired bricks. See what I'm saying? Yeah. We have a tendency not to believe God, Or we have a tendency to say, yeah, God said that, but I'm going to do what I think is best. And so they say, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for ourselves. And then it's funny the way verse 5 is phrased. The Lord came down to look at the city. They're going to this huge city. God has to come down even to see it. It's not really as huge and magnificent as they think it is. And in a way that's kind of us. We have a tendency to take great pride in what we have done, when from God's point of view, it's pretty pipsqueak. And God scattered them. They spoke different languages. Then more genealogy. And these first 11 chapters in Genesis, I think of in a way as God's parables. They are telling truths about our origin. They're telling truths about God's relationship to us, God's relationship to creation. And they are not in any way even pretending to be a geology textbook or an anthropology or biology or anything. They're stories we tell about origins, stories that convey the truth. Just as Jesus' parables are stories that he told to get across particular truths he wanted people to remember. We arrive in a different place in chapter 12. In chapter 12, with Abram, we're starting now a specific person, a specific family line that will be traced as our spiritual ancestor. And I'm not saying that we're leaving the realm of parables behind in any sense, but there's a different feel to it. We have a specific person, not the people of Babel, the people of this place or that place. And again, just as the Lord chose Noah without any reason given, chapter 12 simply begins, the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Nothing about, I've been watching you for a while and I appreciate this about you and you're good at that and I think you're exactly the man for the job. Nothing, just, okay, Abram, here's what I want you to do. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. And then you probably have and curse those who curse you. Interestingly.
And the one who curses you, I will curse.
Yeah. The only problem is that's not right. The one, I will belittle, I will make light of the one who curses you. It's two entirely different words. I will bless those who bless you, same word in the two blesses. Why translators say, and I will curse those who curse you, I have no idea. Because the Hebrew is, I will make light of.
What verse is this?
Pardon?
What verse?
That is verse 3, the second line of verse 3.
Oh, I see it.
I will make light of the one who curses. And all the families on earth will be blessed by you. Now, some translations say they will bless themselves. Some translations even say they will want to be blessed as you are. But the Hebrew is pretty simple here. All the families of the earth will be blessed by you, or in you, or through you, however you do the preposition. There's some variation there. So if the people are not blessed, whose responsibility is that? Well, it depends. If you translate all the families of the earth will bless themselves, and they're not blessed, it's their own silly fault. Mm-hmm. And again, I do not want to be dissing translators as a group, but it gets us off the hook theologically to translate it that way. All the families on earth will bless themselves through you. When what God says is all the families on earth will be blessed by you, are to be blessed by you. In other words, Abram, it's Abram's responsibility to spread God's blessing. And in this covenant with Abram, he's promised three things. He's promised family. Everybody needs family, whether it's blood kin, married kin, fictive kin, whatever. Everybody needs somebody with whom they can feel their genuine, real selves. And some of us are blessed that we have that in our family of origin, in in-laws, in children, and also in neighbors, in church, whatever. Everybody needs that somehow. And everybody needs a place. Go to the land I'll show you. I'm going to give you a land. I grew up in a whole bunch of Methodist parsonages in the western half of the state of Ohio. And every church has a parsonage committee. Every church gets some people from central casting. Every church had a parsonage committee with at least one person who had it as her God-appointed duty to make sure we all knew that wasn't our house. And she would, wag her finger in our faces. Now you children, this isn't your house. You have to take care of it. This isn't your house. And I knew it wasn't our house. It was their house. It wasn't our house. But I had my bed and my desk. And that gave me a certain amount of security as a child. I knew even if I was in somebody else's house, she couldn't yell at me about my desk and my bed. They were mine. So everybody needs some place, something. You will have a family, you will have a place, and everybody needs a job to do that's worth doing. And the job that God gives Abram is to be a channel of God's blessing to all the families on earth. And notice it does not say you will be blessing to all the people who are nice to you, or all the people whom you like, or all the people who live within a 20-mile radius. It's absolutely universalism is not an invention of second Isaiah, nor of 20th century tree huggers. I see it all the way back in the very first call of Abram in chapter 12. You are to be a channel of God's blessing to all the families on earth. So he is given in broad terms, promised the three main things that human beings need: a place to belong, a people to belong with, and a job that's worth doing. Now, it doesn't get specific at all. How are you to be a channel of God's blessing? That is as individual as we are. Some people have their right thumb on top, some people have their left thumb on top, and we all have this same job to be a channel of God's blessing. And I get pretty exercised about this and can go on and on and on. A, because I think it's important, and B, because I think we tend to forget it. And Abram's response is not made in words. Abram promises nothing. God doesn't say, if you are faithful and follow me and all that, I will do that. Abram is asked to do nothing except to get up and go. And he does, without saying a word. Verse 4, Abram went forth as the Lord had commanded him, and Lot went with him, Lot his nephew. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran, and he took his wife Sarah, his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth they had acquired, and all the persons they had acquired. This translation I'm looking at is, we all try to soften it. He had slaves. He owned people because he had a lot of wealth, a lot of animals. And when they arrived in the land of Canaan, he passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem and the terebinth of Moreh. A terebinth is just a kind of tree. And then I love these little editorial notes every now and then. The last part of verse 6, the Canaanites were then in the land. Well, whom would you expect to be in the land of Canaan? But Canaanites. But the editor helpfully tells us there were Canaanites in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will assign this land to your offspring. And Abram built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved on hill country east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and built another altar to the Lord, invoked him by name, and journeyed by stages southward or toward the Negev. Negev means the desert. It also is the word for south. And you could go from chapter 12, verse 9 to chapter 13, verse 1, and you would have no idea that you're missing an entire story. And I have a theory that when something is not necessary for the plot, you do not need the second half of chapter 12 to keep the plot going. You could cut it out and nobody would be the wiser. Then I think it's there for another reason. However, we have a tendency to ignore, to forget the second half of chapter 12. First half is in the lectionary, second half is not. And I think that's unfortunate. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this second half, not meaning to tear down Abram. He is, after all, our father in the faith, but a human being. So there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Now we have to talk about a couple of these words. First off, a famine in the promised land, Canaan, Israel, Judah, whatever we're going to call it, the name changes over the centuries. The famine is caused by lack of rain, because the air goes over the Mediterranean and it picks up moisture and it gets to the land and holds on to the moisture. And not until it gets over to the hill country where the air has to go up and air rises and it's cooler, and cooler air can't hold as much moisture as warm air. So it drops the water on the other side. That's Moab. So it just passes right over Judah and drops the rain in Moab. So there are two general places a biblical person will go when there is a famine. They might go to Moab, or they might go to Egypt. Egypt's problem is, in terms of food production, is different from Israel's. In Egypt, the problem is soil fertility. But every year the Nile floods, and the Nile Delta is huge. So the Nile floods over this vast amount of land and leaves all the biological gunk with it, which fertilizes the soil for another year of crops. So the two standard places to go if there's a famine, either Moab or Egypt. Now, the word sojourn is a very particular word with a very particular definition. A sojourner is a foreigner. A sojourner is in the land, is in your land because she cannot sustain herself at home temporarily because of famine or war. A sojourner has no political rights whatsoever. But a sojourner doesn't want to stay in your land indefinitely, doesn't have any interest in becoming a citizen. A sojourner is there only as long as there is famine or war at home. As long as you cannot live at home and you need a place where it's possible to stay alive, you will be a sojourner. And you, as I said, you have absolutely no political rights whatsoever. So Abram goes to Egypt to sojourn there, to be there temporarily until it is safe, until it's possible to go back home. But, so he has found a solution to the problem. Number one is the famine. He decides to go to Egypt, solution number one. But solution number one leads to problem number two. Because as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarah, I know that you're just gorgeous. And the Egyptian men will see you and they'll think she is his wife, and they'll kill me and let you live. So please say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and I may remain alive thanks to you. Problem number two is she is so beautiful. And at this point, we don't know how old she is. We will learn later that she's 10 years younger than he is. And he at this point is 75, so she's 65. And I know my dad thought my mom was gorgeous even when she was in her 80s. And so maybe with, oh, isn't this sweet? This old man thinks his wife is beautiful. And we sort of chuckle appreciatively. And notice he doesn't say, would you be willing to do this? What do you think of this plan, dear? And she says nothing because women tend not to have a voice in the Bible. And not just in the Bible do women often not have a voice, but we don't need to go there right now. So, famine, go to Egypt. Go to Egypt. Your life is in danger because these people, he doesn't know about Egyptians. He's never been to Egypt. But the assumption that many people make about other peoples, that their men are oversexed and have no morals, and our women are the most beautiful in the world. It's been going on for centuries. We still do it. There was a saying in Great Britain in the Second World War after the US entered, that the American soldiers were overpaid, oversexed, and over here. And the British weren't happy about it, some of them. And why is it that he thinks the Egyptians would resort to murder and think, or to think that murder isn't as bad as adultery? You know, they'll kill me to get you. So I've got the answer. Let's just lie about it. Say you're my sister. So when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful she was. So now we know it's not just the eyes of love, that even the Egyptians think she's gorgeous. And Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into Pharaoh's palace, a euphemism for Pharaoh's harem. And because of her, it went well for Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male slaves, female slaves, she-asses, and camels. He got an incredible bride price for her. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarah. So now let's stop and take stock of where we are relative to the threefold promise. Abram has been promised a land. Well, where is he? He's in a foreign land. He's been promised many descendants. How's that going? Well, not only does he not have any yet, but his wife is in a foreign king's harem. He has been promised that he will bring blessing to people. And how's that going? He's brought plague. And if God were more like me, God would look at Abram and said, you know, you're 0 for 3. I'm going to, have a nice life, but I'm going to find somebody who will be a little bit better at this. Because all the way through, Abram never says, God, there's a famine here. What should I do? He doesn't want to bother God, perhaps, because he can come up with an answer on his own. And then what should I do if Sarah is so beautiful that the Egyptians want her? Well, he comes up with an answer on his own. And each time his answer on his own, instead of turning to God, gets him into deeper trouble. And there's a lovely midrash, the Jewish sanctified imagination, historical fiction, filling in the blanks, answering questions, all sorts of lovely stories. There's a great midrash here that asks, what was the plague with which God afflicted Egypt? And they answered, the plague was that which Viagra will fix. They say that as a way of protecting Sarah, that she will not be slept with by anybody else because of the plague that God afflicts them with. And I would even maintain that perhaps the first problem is not the famine in the land. I would back up one step. Maybe the first problem is that Abram is too rich. Because we've been told he has lots and lots and lots of flocks and herds and retainers and slaves and all this, that if it was Abram and Sarah and Lot and 3 cows and a bunch of chickens and some goats and maybe a couple helpers, they would be able to survive a famine for quite a while by moving around. But if he has vast flocks and herds then a famine will mean he can't survive there. Now, I'm putting into the text something that's not there. All the hints are there. We're told how very rich he is. And so I'm wondering if maybe part of his problem was that he was rich. Maybe not. But anyway, the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues, and Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister? So that I took her as my wife. Here she is, take her and go." And Pharaoh put men in charge of him. Pharaoh hired the moving van and also the packers. Pharaoh just wants these guys out, and and sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed. He didn't have to pay back the bride price. So Abram is 0 for 3, and yet God, as the hero of this story, God fixes the situation. God gets him out of this impossible situation. And I'm not sure why we skip over this chapter, except that God is the hero rather than Abram. And sometimes we want our heroes never to have feet of clay. Well, Abram's feet are just as clayish as mine. I think it's a good story. I think it's well placed here. I think we shouldn't forget it. That even when Abram messes up as spectacularly as he has, God steps in and does for him what he cannot do for himself. And I think that's good to remember. Okay, I've been talking a lot. Anybody else is welcome to. Well, then I'll keep talking.
Keep going.
I don't give you much space to get in, do I? I want to skip now to chapter 15. Sometime later, the word of the Lord happened to Abram in a vision, and he said, "Fear not, Abram, I'm a shield to you, and your reward shall be very great." And Abram said, "O Lord God, what can you give me, seeing I shall die childless? The one in charge of my house is a slave." I mean, Abram is so honest with God. This is a wonderful example. God is saying, your reward will be great. And Abram said, "Reward, you promised me. You see any little children running around here? I still have no children, and you promised me children. What's this business about a reward?" It's just words. And God doesn't say, "Wait a minute, Abram. Don't talk to me in that tone of voice." What God does is remarkable. God says, took him outside, said, "Look toward the heavens, count the stars. If you were able to count them, that's how many offspring you'll have." And he said, "I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession." And Abram said, "Okay, how am I supposed to know that?" And then God gives what seems to us a very strange order. "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young bird." And Abram brought all these, and he cut them in two, and placing each half opposite the other, but didn't cut up the birds. And birds of prey came down on the carcasses, and Abram drove them. I mean, what in the world is this? To people of that time, they would know exactly what's going on here. That God is asking for preparation for a covenant ceremony. Now, covenant is a word we use in the church. When we don't want to say agreement, we'll say covenant because it sounds all lofty and churchy. But a covenant is between unequal partners. And the form we get from Hittite vassal treaties, the content is going to be vastly different. And we have many things in scripture which have the same form as things in other surrounding cultures, but the content, the theology is very, very different. If you want to teach a congregation a new hymn, new text and new word and new music, don't do new music and new text all at the same time. It's too hard to learn two different things. Use the new words to a familiar tune put familiar words to the new tune, and people can get used to it that way. And then when you spring on them the new words in the new tune, each will be familiar and it'll go fairly well. So the Hittite vassal treaty is when the winners of a battle will say to the losers, bring a bunch of animals and cut them in half, and you can't see that. You set them so that there's a pathway between the cut up animal halves. The losers have to march between those cut up animal halves and recite whatever the winners tell them to recite. And it's basically, we will always be loyal to you and we'll never try to get out from under your yoke and we'll always pay taxes on time, all this sort of thing. All the winners have to promise is, if you do not keep this promise, we will come back here and make you look like these cut up animal halves. They take it very seriously. So Abram is probably thinking, okay, we're going to have a tree. I wonder what I'm going to have to promise. But as the sun was about to go down, a deep sleep fell upon him and a dark dread. And God said, know well that your offspring will be strangers in a land not theirs, and so forth. You shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a ripe old age. They'll come back here. And when the sun set and it was very dark, there appeared a smoking oven, a flaming torch, which passed between the pieces. And the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring, I assign this land, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. That the smoke and fire are two of the symbols of the presence of God. And that's what goes between the animal pieces. God is saying, I take the role of the one who makes a promise. Abram doesn't do anything but witness it. Abram makes no promise whatsoever. God is promising. And God is using the strongest cultural symbol of a promise, this covenant ceremony with the animal carcasses. It's like if you go to the elementary school girls at Swanee Elementary School and you want to make a real promise, you'd probably pinky swear. Pinky promise? You don't do that for, I'll see you tomorrow. You do that for, we're going to be friends forever, even when we're grown-ups. Yeah. And I wonder, what could God use culturally today to make a promise that we would believe? I learned when my son-in-law was in law school, I learned that there is a subcategory of law in this country, of the legal profession, very well paid, that you spend your entire professional life breaking contracts. What could God possibly do that we wouldn't figure some clever lawyer could break? See, our mindset is just so different. That if God says, I promise, if God signs it, gets it notarized, I mean, we have trouble with that notion. I think it's partly because we have trouble trusting each other. Or even thinking that keeping our word is important. You can always get a lawyer to break the contract if you need to. And that kind of cynicism really bothers me. But I'm nattering on again. I skipped over a very important verse in this chapter 15. And that is verse 6. God has said, look to the sky. If you can count the stars, that's how many offspring you'll have. Now, verse 6 is literally, and he trusted in the Lord, and he considered him righteous. Now, your English translation probably helpfully changes it around. He trusted in the Lord, and so God reckoned that he was righteous, something like that. But that's not what it says. it says that Abram trusts the Lord because Abram believes that God is righteous. It's the righteousness of God, not the righteousness of Abram, that is being celebrated here. It's God's righteousness that upholds us. It's not our own. We are able to be righteous, at least part of the time, only because of God's righteousness. And maybe we need to do a sidebar on what do we mean by righteousness, or what is righteous. Righteousness and justice are two words that go together. Justice is the right relationship between us and things, stuff, possessions, land, whatever. Righteousness is the proper relationship between people, among people, and between people and God. And you can't really have righteousness unless you also have justice. I cannot be in right relationship with you if I'm also stealing from you. And it's God's righteousness that undergirds whatever righteousness we may have. And that's what this verse is saying. That Abram, it finally dawns on Abram that God is righteous. And because of that righteousness, Abram is able to trust God. Because there have been a number of places here, we haven't looked at all of them, where Abram has stumbled, has messed up, and God has always come and set things right again. And Abram finally is deciding that God is righteous. And because of that, because of the righteousness of God undergirding him, Abram trusts God. It's not that God trusts Abram because Abram is so righteous. He's not. He's a human. But he's a human being undergirded by the righteousness of God. But still no children. So we come to chapter 16. And Sarah had borne him no children. And she had an Egyptian slave whose name was Hagar. Sarah said to Abram, you know, the Lord has kept me from having any children, so why don't you sleep with Hagar, and any child born to her we'll call ours. Apparently this was done in some of the surrounding cultures. And Abram heeded Sarah's request. So Sarah, Abram's wife, took her slave Hagar the Egyptian, after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan for 10 years, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. Your English is probably going to say as a concubine. What does your English, what does yours say, Bill? Okay, this is 16 verse 3.
Hold on. 3. So after Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abraham as a wife.
Oh, really? Oh, wonderful.
This is
Many of the translations say concubine. But she is a wife. She's not going to be treated as a wife, but she is a wife. He slept with Hagar, she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. This is so human and so understandable. I may be your slave, but you know what? I'm pregnant. And this would be salt in the wound for Sarah. Sarah said to Abram, the wrong done to me is your fault. I gave my slave to you, and now that she's pregnant, I'm lowered in her esteem. The Lord decide between us. And Abram said to Sarah, yeah, she's in your hands. Deal with her as you see fit. So here he's abdicating responsibility. She's a wife. She is his responsibility. He's saying, I don't want to get into this. Do whatever you want. So Sarah treated her harshly and she ran away. And an angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, said, Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from? Where are you going? This is the same kind of question we've seen before. Adam, where are you? Cain, where's your brother? Hagar, what's going on? And she said, I am running away from my mistress Sarah. Now, I do not like this next verse at all. And sometime maybe we can have a whole series of what do we do when God says things we don't like. Verse 9, the angel of the Lord said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. But that's not all that's said. The angel said, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. Now, she's getting a promise that is parallel with what Abram has gotten. You're going to have more offspring than you can count. And the angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. No, wait, that's New Testament. This is same wording. And you shall call him Ishmael. You shall call him God hears. For the Lord has heard, has paid attention to your suffering. Now, verse 12 is exceedingly important. And I'm sorry we're practically out of time because this is so important. First line, he shall be a wild ass of a man. That's exactly what it says. But we need a cultural translation. To call somebody wild ass today is not a compliment. But in that culture, what the angel is saying to Hagar is, you are going to have a son. He will be wild and free, strong and free. And to say to a slave, your son will be strong and free is good news. We would say he'll be a wild stallion. He'll be a bald eagle. You know, we would find animals. We would just not say a wild ass of a man. Then it goes on, and the Hebrew says, his hand with everyone. I can pretty much guarantee your English says against.
Yes. And
everyone's hand with him. Hand is symbolic of power. He is going to be a coalition builder. But it has been mistranslated. Now, I don't want to put Sherry on the spot, but first semester Hebrew, you learned that ba means with, and al means against. And this says ba every single time. It's with every single time. She's nodding her head. Thank you, Sherry. Now, some of you will have the last line, and he shall dwell alongside his kinsmen. Some of you have that. Some will say, and he will live in enmity. He'll live in conflict with his kinfolk.
You shall live at odds with.
At odds with, yeah. That's wrong. It's not what it says. He will live in the presence of, he will live alongside. And I think this verse has done almost incalculable damage in Jewish, Muslim, and Christian Muslim relations. Because we look at this and we say, oh, God said from the beginning, Jews and Muslims will never get along, so why should we even bother trying? That's not what it says. You know, Ishmael is the father of Islam, as Abraham is the father of Judaism and Christianity. It says he'll be a coalition builder. He'll be strong and free and live among his kinfolk. And if we translate it, and let me say, I have infinite sympathy for people who are reading it in English, because you have what you have. I am angry at translators who perpetuate this mistake. It's simple Hebrew. Sometimes I will argue with the translation and it's complicated and, you know, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of another. This is simple. This should not be translated against. It says with. And I'll stamp my little foot. And at some point, I think people have a vested interest in keeping it like this because, again, it gets us off the hook. If God said they're always going to be fighting, well, it's out of our hands. But that's not what it says. Now, why should you believe me just because I happen to teach someplace? I don't know what we do with passages like this, because people will rightly say, but my Bible says against. How can you come in here and say it means with? And I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do, because frankly, everybody in the world is not going to learn Hebrew. if they did, this would be simple. I don't know.
Question.
Yes.
You know, when in the Jewish Bible, then how is this translated?
Well, what I'm reading out of is JPS.
Okay.
There's the Hebrew column and there's their English column.
Yes.
And it says against. They know better.
Uh-huh.
They
Okay.
know better.
Yes.
However, they do say for the last time, and he shall dwell alongside all his kinsmen. They get the third part right. But see, they have just as much of a vested interest in mistranslation as we do.
Mhm. Yes.
Anytime you can say it's not my fault, we have a tendency to go for that.
Mhm.
So what do we do with something like this? It's not just a rhetorical question. Okay, I also need to recognize that according to my computer, it's 7:06.
Ah.
And time to be winding down. I am just so delighted that people actually came to try to do this.
Yes.
And next week we'll have more.
Okay,
This was outstanding.
well,
Let me also tell you that at the moment, there are 14 people watching the website.
wow.
So you've got
That's great.
14 plus 7, you've got 21 people here tonight.
And some of the squares have 2 people in them.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true. There's
I didn't count
Vicky.
that. That's 2, 4, 6, 8 plus 14 is, what is 8 plus 14? 22.
That's
We're going to pass the hat around now.
Yeah.
since we're being all electronic, let me suggest, if we don't have time tonight to get to your questions, and especially the people who are watching and don't have any ability to say anything, send your questions in an email. Now, I don't have the answer to everything, but, and B, you know, we don't have time for everything, but yeah, Sherry, sort of like an exit ticket.
Yes, yes.
My email address is rwright, RWRIGHT, at Sewanee, SEWANEE.edu. Fairly self-explanatory. rwright at Sewanee.edu. And I would be delighted to get some questions and see what I can do with them. But I leave a question also with you. What is the responsible thing for a Christian to do when you find out about a wrong translation? I'm not hearing. I don't know who that was. Somebody said something that was just garbage.
I think someone might be listening, having both browsers open for St.
Okay.
Joseph's and Zoom.
Okay,
So what was the question again, Becky?
yes. I did, what, Bill?
What do
What-
we do with
what-
misinterpretation?
What do we do with misinterpretations?
That's my question to you. What do we as responsible Christians do?
Go out and tell the world. Put it in my sermons.
Yeah. No, we all have to decide, you know, none of us can fight all the battles that need to be fought. And for some people, this won't be a big deal. That's fine. But sometimes things will be a big deal.
Mhm.
And this is one that I simply cannot ignore. But I don't know I don't know how to solve it.
Seismic difference.
Hmm?
It's a seismic difference.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's 100. One here, one here.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
And we had a student many years ago who wrote an honors paper on this verse. She looked at the preposition every other time it's used in the Bible, and it's used hundreds of times. No other place does it mean against. Every other place it means in or on or with. It does not mean against.
Sherry, you have something to say?
No, I was just thinking about how neat it would be if Becky would put together a list of all of those things that are seismic mistranslations, things that we need to be aware of, because she knows them all.
Well,
Because
no,
we've talked about them.
I know a lot of them.
You know a lot of them.
Every now and then I find another one and I go berserk.
We talked about.
Write a book.
In my spare time, I think I will.
Kind of we look at something. Yeah, I am that spare time deal.
Mhm. Well, I want to keep faith with you all, not keep you online longer than, I think this was supposed to be an hour and we've gone an hour and 10 minutes now. Thank you.
Worth it.
I'm so impressed with Carl's leading me through it so that I could, actually show up.
Yes.
Thank
And
you, Becky.
This is also, I'm practicing for when the School of Theology comes back, we're going to have to be doing things like this.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
It was a wonderful medium. It worked really well. And in some ways kept my attention more than sitting in a big room with everybody. So
okay.
I really enjoyed it. It was really very powerful.
Thank you, Carl.
I had a good time too.
Well, you're all welcome. Thank you. We had a lot of help. It took a community to put it together. Let me, Becky, confirm for me chapter and verse that we're looking at specifically, because I think I wrote something down wrong.
Okay. Chapter 16,
Right.
verse 12.
Okay, well, that's what I had. All right, very good. I posted just a few minutes ago a link to a site. It's a parallel site that gives the Hebrew and, in fact, several modern Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew before 585, and then it gives it in the different translations. You might find it interesting to look through that.
Mm-hmm.
You can find your specifically 1612 and see what it has to say, because it is interesting.
Thank you. I'll do that.
At this point, I really need to let Becky go. She's got a life to live and it's getting late for her. I don't know if she's had dinner yet herself.
Well, I can make that happen.
I don't have an hour and a half drive now ahead of me.
That's true.
I
can be home in 10 minutes.
Bill, why don't you say a closing prayer, and then I'm going to hit a button that's labeled end meeting.
Okay.
At that point, everybody will disappear.
I do want to make another announcement in the fact that this meeting is working out so well that we had our noonday prayer earlier today, and tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the evening, we'll be doing Compline. So we're trying to get worship mixed in with some education. So, and Becky will be back next week at 6 o'clock again to continue this fine series. So by then we should be trending for sure. And they'll probably have us on TV, no doubt, in NBC and Today Show. But anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Becky, for a really uplifting and thought-provoking session. We are grateful. Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks this day for this time together. We thank you for the medium of this computer that I don't understand how to do it. But God, you have put people in our place that will help us and guide us in this new tool that has been given us. We thank you for that. We thank you for the village that made it possible to happen. I thank you especially for Becky and her knowledge and her wisdom that she so easily imparts. We pray that we would have the courage to speak the words that we learn and be able to speak with your righteousness in this world. Give us the wisdom to be your people and to respond to people the way we should. Help us again to be your people, and we give you thanks. We thank you for our ancestors back in the faith, Abraham or Abram, and all the rest of them back to Adam and Noah and Sarah. Thank you. We thank you for all of these folks that have enlightened our lives to such a high degree. We ask you to be with us this night, give us peace and give us rest. Bless this country and this world of ours, and make us all united in your life. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you,
Amen.
Bill.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, Becky.
On 3, I'm going to hit end meeting, so everybody's going to go away at 1.
Bye.
Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Good night, all.